Hello and welcome back to Vikings Happy Hour, spot brought to you by Lake Monster Brewing and That's Badass Wood Art. Remember to check out that'sbadasswoodart.com. If you find something you like, you can use promo code CT Pocket and get 20% off any one item. Today we have a great show for you. We have Arif Hasan from Pro Football Network. Is that correct?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
nailed it.
it's brand new, right?
Kind of. It's been around since like 2019, so it hasn't been in the space like for a very long time at all. But I only joined like in September, right? So
Yeah, that's
it's
what I meant.
super
It's
new.
new for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
How you liking it over there?
It rules. It rules. I love it. They let me write all kinds of stuff. I'm shocked every day. I'm just like, hey, what if I write about this? And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm like, you, you sure? And then I write it.
You give a reef too much of a leash. Who knows where he's gonna go?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's a blast. Yeah, I've been checking out a lot of your work over there, and it seems like you're having more fun even than
Oh
maybe in
yeah,
the
I
years
can.
past.
Yeah, I can like style off of anybody, right? I can just dunk on some random NFL owner and nobody cares.
I wonder who you're talking about there. We'll leave that. We'll leave that as an aside. Maybe the readers or listeners can go check that out. Well, excited to chat with you. I know that previously you used to be really focused on the Vikings, and over the last couple of years, you've kind of gone a little bit national, a little Hollywood on us. But we'd love to kind of bring you back over to the Vikings side and talk a little bit about kind of what's happening this offseason, what's coming up here in the next 10 days here with the draft coming up here in a few days, and maybe some of the different directions that you might see us going. So. First things first, you just dropped your consensus big board for the NFL draft. And can you talk to the listeners a little bit about that and what all went into that? How much work did you put into that? I'm sure a ton. So,
Well, to be completely fair and accurate, I did not technically just drop it. This is like an updating, rotating big board. I've been keeping it through since like about September, trying to make sure that it's always updated. It updates about once a month. The final update has not submitted yet, which is why I haven't done like a big Twitter push yet. So right now it's got about like 45 big boards in it. So it's still pretty substantive. It's bigger than the first consensus big board I did back in 2015. So in like a sense, it's like, closer to final than that one ever was. But yeah, I still want to get all the April rankings in, but it's been a ton of work, like you said, making sure that everybody's names are spelled correctly, making sure that all of the player names are consistent, even if they're all spelled correctly. There's, do I call him Junior Fahoko or do I call him Viliami Fahoko? Right? They're both accurate, right? Do I include the senior? Do I include the three? I don't know at the end of names. And so I had to kind of figure all that out. I have to figure out like what position designations to give some of these players. Like, a cornerback might be a nickel only, might be, kind of both. I have to figure that out and put that in the board. I have to figure out if Brian Branch is a cornerback or a safety, that kind of stuff. But also I have to like figure out, who these people are, because when I put together this board, I have to explain some things. I have to say, hey, the variance on this guy is really high. And I can't just leave it at that. I have to be like, why? Right? Like, why is the variance on this guy high? Well, he just got arrested. I like that seems relevant, right? Or the everybody kind of agrees that this guy is like the 10th ranked prospect. Like they disagree on who's 1 through 9. Everyone disagrees on who's 11 through 15. But this guy is definitely 10th, right? That's like I have to know why that's true. That's weird, right? So like I have to learn a lot about these prospects, but I come at it from like a completely different angle, right? Like I learned about Anthony Richardson probably the same time a lot of the NFL world did when some random highlight against Utah went viral. Then didn't hear anything about him for like 3 months. And now suddenly he's up all these boards, and I have to like figure out, is he an interesting quarterback? Is he good? Is he bad? Why is he so polarizing in this year's draft? And is his rise consistent? And so I have to go back and track all of this stuff, and bugging like 80 different people to make sure that they get the consensus big board in is not a ton of fun. I try to make it fun by yelling at them a lot, but for the most part, making sure that everybody has all their consensus board data in. I have to be like, hey man, I don't think this guy declared for the draft. Can you redo all of it? Thanks. It's a ton of like feedback and back and forth. But what's great is that everybody I get a board from if they want me to, I tell them like all of the stuff that's like unique about their board. Like, hey, you're really high on this guy, this guy, this guy. You're really low on this guy, this guy, this guy. You didn't even rank this guy. And that gives them like a lot of content that they can work off of and talk about who are my guys, why do I like these guys, what's different about my approach. And then what's really cool is it also allowed me to build up relationships with a ton of people. So I just finished a piece on, which is why I think a lot of people are talking about the consensus big board today, on quarterbacks of the past 5 years compared to this year's class. And so I talked to a bunch of people who have provided boards for me over the years. And I was like, hey, can you rank all 26 of the quarterbacks that won in the first 2 rounds plus the 5 in this year's draft? And they did, and they gave me some feedback and insights on why they did that. And it gives you a really good sense of like how strong like a quarterback class is. So long answer to that question, but it's one of my pet projects.
That's great. I had a question, Arif. So I think 2015, you said it was the year you first started your consensus big board. Obviously, it's been 6, 7, 8 years now. What have you started to see more of a like position of value trend as the big boards continued along? Like
100%.
And like what I'm trying to like how to best phrase this question. So like because the position of values become even more like just publicly important and everybody seems to just value it even more than in the past. What like how does that change how you view the boards as they come in?
Yeah, no, one thing that, and actually that's a really great way to kind of frame it. One thing that, that has happened is that, quarterbacks have shot up the consensus boards. You can imagine that, but receivers have as well, right? That they've been part of the positional value, equation, but also like the past couple of receiver classes were not that bad. So, there's a part of that, is related to it too, but like you can compare the 2020 receiver class to the 2014 receiver class. You take a look at, what the consensus was. Cause I didn't publish a board in 2014, but I was beginning this idea for the project. So I had gathered a couple of boards, and the receiver ranks for people like Sammy Watkins and Odell Beckham and Mike Evans. I mean, just a phenomenal class. Keenan Allen. They were not nearly as high as the receiver ranks in 2020 for like Henry Ruggs and Justin Jefferson. And maybe Ruggs is not the world's best example, given that he's out of the league right now, but CeeDee Lamb, right? But the ranks of those guys went up just at receiver, right? Relative to the rest of the board. Running backs in particular have gone down, which is why I think the Bijan Robinson conversation is fascinating, because I think in a lot of years he'd be like number 2 behind Will Anderson, or maybe number 3 behind Jalen Carter. But because it's a quarterback class and because quarterbacks just matter so much more than they did in 2015, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, Christ. I lost all my hair. But the Bijan, would be a number 1, number 2, number 3 prospect. He's actually number 5 right now. I don't remember a board in the past 3-4 years where a running back was in the top 10, and that includes some really stellar running backs, right? And so for Bijan to be 5, I think that says more than like when Ezekiel Elliott was 3, right? Like I think it's more meaningful, right? And
is he behind Stroud and Young too? Is that like the
and those are the 4 ahead of him? It's Stroud, Anderson, Young, and Carter, right? And it's not like Young and Stroud are bad prospects, right? But it's just like for this guy to be ranked 5th in the consensus, and maybe that'll drop by the time I incorporate a couple of boards. I think that is massive in terms of the amount of talent that he has to offer. Now, some boards have dinged running backs pretty significantly. I've seen some boards where Bijan is by far and away the top running back. There's like 40 ranks between him and Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Who's typically the second running back. And he's like 28th on the big board. It's just like, a lot of these boards are just like running backs, man. I don't know. This guy's so good. I think he might be a fringe first rounder. It's like such a weird way to put it. And it also means that like, when these boards are put together, they're getting a little bit closer to the way the NFL drafts, because big boards typically are just talent, right? They're not valuation. But a lot of the draft experts that have kind of approached this are just like, well, if the best player in the NFL draft at his position, if there's no one like him at this position in the past decade, is a fullback, he's not going number 1 on my board. And so knowing that I'm already putting some positional value into play here, I'm going to start moving some stuff around. I'm going to put tackles above guards unless it's a Q, right? Unless it's Quentin Nelson, right? I'm going to start putting, centers a little bit below those guards, even though centers are supposed to be, like the smart. I mean, they are the smartest member of the offensive line typically, but they're typically a little bit easier to replace in other capacities. So I'm going to put them a little bit lower, even though the top center of the draft used to go in the first round on occasion, right? These edge rushers, I'm just going to push them up to the top, that kind of thing. And so now the boards are reflecting the draft a little bit more accurately, although last year was a pretty big miss in that respect because all the quarterbacks that were supposed to go in the first and second round went third and fifth round.
So
yeah, that was weird.
That was weird.
No, go ahead, Miles. You're good.
I was just going to ask, so when you look at how the position of values change, and we take this back to the Vikings, how do you think Kwesi did as his first year as a GM? Because we kind of saw, and I think, Kwesi being an analytical type, GM as considered, and having that background, position of value has got to be something I know he views as valuable, but he didn't draft that way the first part of the draft. His first draft as the Vikings GM last year, not as much as maybe I would have expected, especially in the first few picks. How do you feel that stacked up compared to maybe either his predecessor or just like across the league?
Yeah. Going like safety first and guard third or something like that is a little bit of a surprise from that respect. But the positional value of safeties has actually been fairly well debated in the analytics community. There are a lot of people that think safeties are very valuable, a lot of people that think safeties are overvalued. And so it really kind of depends on what side of the divide Kwesi's in. And, his first year as a GM, we were able to actually ask him about this like very question, right? Like, defensive tackle is like a less valuable position than edge rusher, but like, no one is not paying Aaron Donald edge rusher money, right? So like, how do you kind of resolve this? And he's like, well, the position that you play obviously is important, right? We're obviously going to pay most attention to quarterback, but the reason positional value is important. He said this in like a different phraseology. I'm summarizing. But the reason that like these positions matter more, generally speaking, is because those players have the ability to solve more problems for you. And so I just view it as, can this player solve some problems for me? And if it's a defensive tackle, it's a defensive tackle. If it's not, whatever. That doesn't mean I'm going to ignore positional value. I know quarterbacks matter a lot. I know that in, a 3-receiver league, that receivers are going to be a little bit harder to find. So I'm going to value them a little bit more. But I know that if I got a running back that has the ability to beat, the best coverage linebacker in the NFL deep down the field on a receiving route, that guy might be pretty good. And so, he's a little bit more flexible on it than I think a lot of the online discussion about positional value has kind of evolved. And I think that the solving problems mindset is kind of one reason why you saw a guard go, was it 66 overall? I think it was like, something like that. But,
I think it was in the 50s. I think 66 was Asamoah.
No, yeah, you would know.
That's right. That's right.
I would
It was like 51 or 52, I think.
Yeah, it was in the second round. It was in the second round.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, well, a guard that high, is kind of weird, but there were some problems to solve in the Vikings roster. A guard was one of them. So I think that was kind of an approach that he took. But I think that, hey, if he gets a bite of the apple at quarterback, I think he's going to take it this year.
And looking at that from that perspective, you've done your homework on a lot of these quarterbacks and they're on your consensus board, right? Do we need to make that move up to be able to secure one of those top 4 guys? Or with some of these other quarterbacks that we're potentially looking at, Hendon Hooker, it's a big buzz name around our community right now. DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I know that's somebody that we met with at the Combine. Miles and I really like him a lot. What route do you think that they might try to venture off into?
I have yet to find a Vikings fan that likes Hendon Hooker. I don't really know what that's about because he's
like Hendon Hooker.
Oh, you do?
Okay. I like Hendon Hooker. I don't know if I like him at 23, but I like him.
I think
but I mean like at all, right? So like liking him in the third round, that I think is somewhat unique. So like
I took him in the second round.
Sure. So he's ranked somewhere around 60th on the consensus big board, but I bet by the time I update this for the final board, he'll be above 50. I don't think he'll cross 30, but I think he'll be above 50. And so how do you kind of handle that, right? Like, how do you figure out if, quarterback's really important, 23 is not great, you don't have a second round pick, what are you going to do about it? If they really are committed to this idea of a quarterback, and I don't think they're committed to any particular strategy, but if they were committed to one strategy and it was to find a quarterback, it would be to try and leverage all the assets to trade up for like a Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, or if that's impossible, wait, trade down, hopefully get another 3rd round pick, maybe a 2nd round pick. We'll see what happens with like Dalvin Cook and maybe Zadarius Smith in terms of the picks that they'll provide. But trade down, get another 3rd round pick, maybe package the 3rds together to get into the 2nd, grab Hendon Hooker with that. I don't know. But that would be if they're like really committed to one particular strategy. I don't know that they are. I would say that, so I don't particularly love Hendon Hooker. I think he'd be a great value at the bottom of the 2nd, top of the 3rd. I don't like him at the top of the 2nd either. But, I also kind of don't care how much I don't like him, right? Like, I think that they should make a pick at quarterback.
Take this swing.
Yeah.
Just do
right,
it.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah. I didn't like Kellen Mond. I'm glad they made the pick. Turns out not to have worked. You gotta take some misses when you swing, right?
Can we extrapolate on that a little bit? Because one thing I've noticed, well, we know Kellen Mond wasn't drafted as like it's hard to say like he wasn't drafted to be the future starter, but he was drafted high enough to be considered a future starter.
Yeah, you could put him on a developmental track potentially.
Yeah. But I think when you're going to draft a quarterback, let's say in the first 3 rounds, your idea is like maybe that guy could potentially be your starter, whether it's anywhere between years 1 and 3, right? If you could find out early that guy's not going to be, that's also like it sucks. Like, of course, you don't want to miss, but if you're going to miss, you want to know early. And I think to that point, like kind of what you're saying about Mond, I liked Mond. I liked the pick. I liked the idea that they were actually taking a swing at a guy at a fairly high enough pick that it mattered. But
now they know they need to get a quarterback. Right.
Yeah, now they know. And it wasn't one of those like, maybe this could be a guy, maybe not. And they're kind of wavering. It was just like, no, this guy sucks. We're going to move on and we're going to take another swing at some point, like early. And they didn't decide to wait 3-4 years, some other teams do. And so that was just one thing I wanted to like talk a little bit more about because I just find it fascinating.
So in the Minnesota Football Party, Sam presented an option to both Luke Braun and I about like, hey, would you trade your entire draft to move up for whichever non-top 2 quarterback you'd like? Whether that's Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. Trade the entire. You don't get to draft for the rest of the draft. Or would you rather just kind of have your ideal draft? You get, the cornerback or whatever that you like at 23. You get whoever you like at 87. It's your ideal target, there. Which would you rather have? And Luke and I both said unhesitatingly, for the very reason that you pointed out, Miles, quarterback, right? Because the Vikings will need a quarterback next year, whether that is to extend Cousins or to draft a guy, whatever, right? They may not be in a position to draft a guy based, I don't know what the quarterback draft class is going to look like. Who knows if Spencer Rattler is going to be anything, right? I mean, Ryan, let me know. But
he's off that bandwagon now.
Like Caleb Williams, who knows, right? Like who knows what this group is going to look like and if it's any good or anything like that. But it's probably not going to have 4 quarterbacks, right? So you're probably not going to be able to, if you end up in the same spot with Cousins, which I think is kind of the idea, right? He's supposed to be good, right? The whole point of having him is that you're going to make the playoffs, right? You make the playoffs, now you're not going to be in a spot to grab a quarterback. Well, you don't have to worry about that. You just traded the entire draft class for a guy. So in a unique opportunity where you wouldn't have been able to before, and you get to make a decision. You've got him on the roster for 1 year. He's not playing. Mm-hmm. Then year 2, he's probably playing. Year 3, he's probably playing. And then by then, you've made a decision. If he's no good by year 3, so that's 2025, you make a decision in the 2026 draft to draft a guy. If you can't do that, you probably have to wait until 2026 to draft a guy anyway. So you've missed out on an opportunity to grab a guy because in 2025, you don't have the guy on the roster because at the end of 2024, you didn't have the ammo to move up for the guy because you won too many times without a quarterback on the roster. So you have to wait until 2026 to draft a guy either way. So you might as well take a swing. Right? Like, yeah, okay. Obviously, it sucks not to have the cornerback that you need, especially inevitably when one of them gets hurt. It sucks that there's no competition for KJ Osborne, a known quality wide receiver. But you would love to have some competition with that guy.
What a weekend.
Yeah, incredible stuff, right?
Pure content. I love it.
It's phenomenal, right? It would suck not to have, a long-term successor to Harrison Smith. It would suck not to have some competition at linebacker with Jordan Hicks, right? Like it would really be terrible not to have all these guys. It would be worse not to have a quarterback when you need one.
Right. and you have cap space next year, which is what they planned on for. Well, they planned for cap space next year, right? So, like, if you have your quarterback in your building now, this year, you kind of develop him behind the scenes, and then you go spend to like propel everything around him.
Yeah. Yeah, now all that dead space that everyone's worried about, the Cousins contract, the $28 million, or the $11 million in dead space from the Hunter contract, or whatever, right? Now all that dead space is just kind of absorbed with this quarterback contract. You don't have to worry about it. So you can just spend like normal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, right? You need to find your guy, and you need to know as soon as you know right away what you need to do at that position, the most important position. Kwesi's talked about that multiple times. Going into non-quarterback talk here. Obviously, we have a few position of need that you had mentioned, right? Cornerback, wide receiver, linebacker, potentially safety. Let's say we just
right, yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's actually a huge need.
Everything. We could just say like every position.
Everything, basically. Yeah, everything. We're very top heavy still, right? If we decide to not go the quarterback route, what would you like to see, or what are you seeing out in the in the Twitter sphere and the Viking sphere that potentially what route do we go, and where would you like to see us go?
I've been banging the drum for Deonte Banks at cornerback at Maryland. I love him. This would be by consensus in overdraft. I think he's ranked 34th on the board right now. Again, we'll see when the final board comes out. And at 23, that would be a bit of a reach. But I think that he's more talented than Kelee Ringo. And I like Cam Smith a lot. I think he's a little bit better than Cam Smith too, right? So if you don't get one of those top three corners, which, I mean, if you can get one of the top three corners, screw what I just said, get one of those guys. But, if you can't get him, I like him a lot. I think that would be ideal, but like there are a lot of directions you could go that you could justify it, right? Like when the Vikings were like consistently drafting cornerbacks in the first round and people were kind of making fun of them, including me, right? Part of the reasoning was that kind of the 1-2 year outlook at the position was not great, right? And so they needed to account for the fact that Xavier Rhodes' contract was going to be up. So they drafted, a couple of guys, right? Didn't necessarily work out, but like the thinking was there, right? And so I think that if they grabbed an edge rusher, right, because Marcus Davenport's on a 1-year contract, what if he doesn't work out? Daniil Hunter, who knows what's going to happen with that situation, right? Za'Darius Smith at some point is going to want you grab an edge rusher in the first round. You're not setting yourself up to succeed in 2023, but you probably gave yourself some options for 24 and 25. It is probably my least favorite out of like the options that make sense, but it is justifiable. I would prefer a cornerback. I'd prefer a wide receiver. That'd be a ton of fun to see what you could do there. It looks like they're going to be doing a lot more 2 wide receiver stuff, so it's a little bit less urgent. I wouldn't love a linebacker in the first round. Again, that's a positional value thing, but I do think that, Drew Sanders is a very, very talented linebacker. It'd be fun to kind of see him play. But, I would probably wait. It's not a great linebacker class after the top 2 anyway. So, we'll kind of see how that shakes out. But if they grab like a Kalijah Kancey, right, you'd be like, well, hey, they haven't actually had much of interior pass rush.
Does he fit? Does he fit this type of style of defense, do you think?
I mean, what is the style of defense, right? Like it's a fairly adaptable front based off of what Flores has been able to do in the past. So you could set this guy as a 5 and run your like typical 3-4 type stuff, or you could put him on the inside on a 4-3. I mean, Brian Flores has managed fronts where it's like 3-4 on one side and 4-3 on the other side. Like it's very, very kind of flexible. You have to have the linebackers to be able to do it. Who knows, right? But I think that you can kind of make it fit. I think Flores is definitely of like a coaching school where, if a player is talented, there's no such thing as don't fit, which it's a pretty tough school to be on defense because a lot of things have to work together in concert. But I think that that's kind of where he is. And I think that's one reason that, for example, they just signed Juwan Johnson at cornerback. The guy runs a 4.6 40 generously. At his pro day, ran 4.6. We had like a 4.62 otherwise. It does not fit the mold of these athletes that the Byron Murphys and the Caleb Evans and the Andrew Booths. It doesn't fit that mold. The idea is that they'll figure it out, right? They'll figure out a way to kind of enable him. And I think that is the approach that a lot of this defense has. And that approach can be disastrous. I don't think that like we say too often, good coaches make good players fit. And there is such a thing as positional fit. And there is such a thing as a good player thriving elsewhere. But I think that the way this defense works, you could justify exactly someone like a Kalijah Kancey. If the Clemson tackle Brian Bresee falls, I think that they could justify that pick there. So there's a lot of things you could do the first round. I think cornerback ideally is the thing that you'd want to do, because it's tough for me to have confidence in both the Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth working out. Like I'm reasonably confident that one of them will. Don't know who it's going to be, right? It is tough for me to be completely confident that both of them will, and so you might as well make sure that you've got as much talent as possible out there at corner. It's a very important position. But yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a lot of positions where you could say, hey, do that. The only position where I would be like, I don't know, man, is tight end, right? It's like they're good on tight ends. They just signed one. They've got a great Pro Bowler. And it's such a deep class. You could probably find a great guy in the 4th round. So that's probably the one position where I'm just like, maybe not. Like if they grabbed a tackle, I'd be like, I guess he could play guard, right? Like there's not a position where you can't figure out kind of what the thinking is there. Like safety, Harrison Smith's going to be gone. This guy's not going to contribute right away, but Harrison Smith's gone.
What about Bijan Robinson? Do you feel that same way or no?
It depends on what they do with Dalvin. If they get a great return for Dalvin, grabbing a running back in the 1st round wouldn't really bother me that much. If they get a poor return for Dalvin, it just feels like that is not the best use of resources. God, Bijan's that dude though, right? Like it's tough. He's good.
Yeah, he's generational potentially, right? I mean,
yeah, he's also a running back.
I mean, I watched him tour up my team for a while, and it's something. It's something.
Yeah, right? Like it's tough because it's tough because like you see like that Saquon Barkley has not done the world's best job of lifting the Giants out of their muck, because no running back can do that.
I was going to say it's not his fault. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. A quarterback can do that. And if Daniel Jones had some receivers this year, I think it would have been better than if Barkley had been injured all year, right? If they had a star receiver, that would have helped them more. But then you also see like Christian McCaffrey in the 49ers was like really great. Like it is really difficult to watch that team and make an argument that Christian McCaffrey had very little impact, right? So there's probably a world somewhere in the middle there where like that's where Bijan fits, but you have to be really careful because right now McCaffrey is about the only second contract running back that has really given the team what they want, and it's not even the team that signed him to the second contract, right? Like Ezekiel Elliott, obviously that didn't pan out, right? But you look at Joe Mixon, talk about trading Dalvin Cook, even Derrick Henry, I guess, is on a trade block. I don't know, but it's tough to find that like second contract running back. And so if that's the case, I don't know if Bijan's going to be different, right? Like, yeah, he's a generational back. Is he a generational 30-year-old back? We can't know that. So like it's tough, but I mean, I don't know. It's exciting. If they did that, I'd be excited. If that's a metric, probably not a great move. Be fun to watch the Vikings though.
Yeah, I feel like McCaffrey and Aaron Jones are like the only two guys that have like that. And Austin Eckler, I think he's the other guy too, but he gets
Eckler's interesting too.
So much less than the rest of those guys. Yeah. But because of their versatility in the pass game, though, like that's why I like those guys so much. But my last question for you, Arif, is more around back to quarterback. We hear this argument, especially for the Vikings fans. You see and hear a lot of Vikings fans. They seem afraid of making that move at the next quarterback because of it being a failure. Because like Kirk has provided consistency and an established consistency, right? And that the Vikings haven't really had in a long time. And I think that's one thing that fans seem to be afraid of. Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. And like, so I get it. I get it from that standpoint. But also, he's 35. He's always been expensive for the Vikings. Like, right. So like the timing makes sense. But the one thing that people always seem, maybe next year's the right year because they need to do X, Y, and Z before they get their franchise quarterback. Right. I know. I see it. That's what the question I'm going to ask you. Right. Is when is the like right time to make that move for your quote unquote franchise quarterback in the draft? Is it like when you have an established roster, like, the Vikings signed Kirk Cousins in 2018 because they felt he was the missing piece? Or is it more like we're starting to rebuild back up? We want that quarterback to be a part of that journey.
Well, so this discussion really only makes sense if you're picking later than 16, right? Because the Bengals should not have picked Joe Burrow because they had an awful roster, right?
Yeah,
and then they surrounded him with talent, right? And then they made it to the AFC Championship game twice, right? Like, I mean, so for a team like that, it's like the Chiefs roster wasn't that great when they traded up
Right.
for Patrick Mahomes, right? It
I
was
see it similar to the
good.
Vikings, to be honest.
Yeah. That's actually
a few elite players, and then they had guys, right?
Yeah, they guys, right? And it's like, yeah, we put together, we coached Alex Smith up to the best performance of his career in his life, right? And then, but like, it wasn't like it was because they had all of this crazy talent. In fact, like they got lucky in the 5th round, they got Tyreek Hill, right? So like, I like these guys that like trade up from like the bottom half of the draft to the top half of the draft. If the quarterback works, they're happy, right? It's not like Mitchell Trubisky's problem was that the Bears were bad. It was that Mitchell Trubisky was bad, right?
Right.
Like it wasn't like Blake Bortles ended up having a phenomenal support, like outstanding supporting cast beyond my wildest dreams, given how good the Jaguars were like 2 years prior to that, right? Like when Yannick Ngakoue was like good, they had like the 2017 defenses between the Vikings and the Jaguars were some of the best defenses we'd seen for the past 3-4 years, right? And both of them happened the same years. One of them happened to the Jaguars with Bortles, right? That wasn't going to last. They had a great supporting cast. Bortles didn't become good. So the right time to get a franchise quarterback is basically, are you capable of getting that guy? And do you need that guy? Now it's the right time. And by need, I mean, if you don't know who your quarterback on the roster is in 2 years, then you need that guy, right? Which is why the Packers were right to grab a quarterback. I don't know if it was Jordan Love specifically.
Sure.
I didn't love him. But like the Packers were right to grab a quarterback, and they've been grabbing quarterbacks, right? That's just part of the Packers school
Patriots
of thought.
have been doing it since
exactly.
Tom Brady.
They had no idea that like Tom Brady was going to play until he was 40. And at some point they were just like, look, and they drafted a quarterback in the 2nd round, like consistently. Some of them didn't work out. Some of them were Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Okay. And so the right time is like, I don't know who my quarterback's going to be in 2 years. And this is a franchise quarterback, we think. That's the right time. Get him.
That's why I continue to think that, like, to your point earlier, the Vikings are like, if a guy falls, only if a guy falls, like a Richardson or Levis falls far enough, and I really see them making that move up because of that very reason. Like, if you could spend a future 2nd round pick to move up, or a future 1st, but it's one pick, not all of your picks, right? To go get that guy for yourself and then train him behind the scenes. I see that being like what Equazi and KOC would like to do. Obviously, again, it all matters on how and what and how the board plays out and how everything, the first like probably 10 picks. Because I think getting up to 3
Richardson would have to
impossible.
fall, and they would have to agree that he's a 1st round quality quarterback, and they'd have to have like, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Getting to 3 would be like fucking impossible though. People keep saying that. I'm not saying that they technically couldn't, but I just that's like,
so like if you were like, hey, would you trade all 5 of the Vikings picks to get up to 3? Obviously, right? No team would not trade up to 3 with what the Vikings have. The real issue is you probably have to trade Dalvin Cook to somebody and use that, right? Maybe trade Za'Darius Smith to somebody and use that. Then you'd probably have to trade 2 firsts on top of all of that, because the Vikings are picking so late in this year's 1st round. So that might not even be enough, honestly.
Right. No, that's the crazy part.
Yeah. And honestly, the only way I'm doing that is with one of those top 2 guys. Right. Like I'm not trying to do that for Richardson.
Right. Yeah. That's a big, like, if it's like the case that like the Houston Texans really are out on Stroud for whatever reason, I don't know. Cause like that's been the rumor the past 48 hours, right? Is that, if it's not Young, they might trade out, or they might just grab Will Anderson or whatever. Then like, hey, Cardinals, do you want every pick? Then okay, cool. Now you've got like a division full of like Ohio State quarterbacks or something, right? But like, I think that it would have to be if like somebody falls a little bit past 8 or 9, or maybe you'd have to wait until past 10, because 23 is a big trade up. But I mean, Chiefs did it for Mahomes. That should tell you a lot.
Right.
They had a guy.
Yeah, and that's what we've been saying for years, I think. So my last question before we wrap this up, and it's kind of silly, but you were on around this time last year. You and I were kind of going back and forth with each other on Brian Asamoah. Has your feelings about him changed?
Of course they have. I've got new information.
New information, yes. I love it.
Yeah, you've always got to update your priors. I would say, the vast majority of our understanding of how good he'll be is still unknown, right? Like we still don't know. He has played beyond my expectations, right? And I think that him picking up the playbook as quickly as he did is impressive. I think it speaks a lot to what the negatives in his scouting report are supposed to be, but he still freelances a lot. He's still missing gaps a lot. He's still, making those kinds of mistakes. And you still have to wonder whether or not, because he was such a good run defender, but he was so small, right? You still have to wonder how much of that is still going to translate, right? Because a lot of it's relying on shooting gaps still. So I'm a lot more optimistic than I was, like a year ago when we talked about it. But I'm still in wait and see mode. But I think the fact that he's unquestionably the starter alongside whoever, could be Jordan Hicks. Hopefully, there's going to be a camp battle there, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that he's the unquestioned starter, I think, speaks a lot to me probably being wrong about this.
Well, and to be fair to you, he outplayed my expectations. I didn't I was like, all right, core special teamer, maybe breaks starting lineup that like plays relatively like what he's more of like year 2, year 3 kind of guy. And I mean, shoot, by end of last year, I was like, he should have been starting over Hicks for sure.
I would have been comfortable with that if they'd made that decision by like week 9. I've been like, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on maybe after the draft, just because it's always good to kind of get your insights on that as well, but we can coordinate that later. Can you tell the listeners what you're working on, anything that they can look forward to and where they can find you?
Yeah, so I've got profiles coming up on so I just published my profile on Bryce Young. I've got profiles coming up on the other 3 top 4 quarterbacks and maybe Hendon Hooker if I've got enough time to write that. Plus, I've been talking to some visual cognitive scientists about this S2 test everyone was talking about a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm like really curious about it. So I'll get a piece about that hopefully on Monday. And then the final version of the consensus big board will be out next week. It'll include who the most polarizing players are. It'll include 87 or whatever boards. It'll include like almost 90 boards. It'll include kind of the differences between forecaster and evaluator boards. It'll include all of the content that I typically put out with the consensus big board, with a lot of the analysis breaking down all of the differences between all these players and which players kind of stand out in that respect. And then after the draft, we'll be using the consensus big board to grade these teams.
Amazing. Well, make sure you go check that out at Pro Football Network.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, go check out Pro Football Network for all that content from Arif. And as always, if you like the content here, please like and subscribe. We are doing a giveaway, a That's Badass Wood Art Skol sign for one lucky listener, one lucky subscriber, I should say, once we hit that 3,000 mark. So till next time, Skol Vikings.